Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some overreactions from those CFP games. Obviously, the biggest one is Ohio State. You did a great thing. You beat Texas, you had a great moment in the sun, but if you don't win that game on Monday, it doesn't mean much. I'll be totally honest. It's definitely something that will irk a lot of people around there, but the reality is you got to win a national title. That is the goal, and that will continue to be the goal throughout this week. And we got Anthony, a big time Hurricanes fan, so why don't we jump into this and let's talk about Carson Beck. And what we're talking about with Carson Beck is he is committed to Miami. He is officially a Miami Hurricane, and it's a great pickup for Miami in a lot of different ways. Now, you do have the question for Anthony where does he have the mobility? Does he have the ability to get around different situations the same way Cam Ward did? Now, the big thing to think about here is the Miami offensive line will be better next year. I feel fairly confident about that. They brought in Tommy Brockermeyer from TCU. They obviously do have Francis Mauanoa on the left side. Downright beast, going to be one of the best left tackles in the country next year. So overall, it's going to be a different attack. There's no doubt about that. And I do think the run game is going to be a lot better with a lot of these guys, Mark Fletcher especially. So I do think it's going to be a different offense in a lot of different ways from Shannon Dawson. But the reality is, you got a kid that's 24-3 in his career. You have a kid that's played in the SEC championships, that's played in the CFP, that has done so many things that Miami just hasn't quite been able to do through the last couple years. So it's a great pickup. There's no doubt about that. He's going to give you stability at that position. He's going to give you a lot of leadership at that position where you very badly need it with Cam Ward walking out the door. And it's going to be a lot of different things that you have to continue to add for this team, because the reality of this situation as well is Carson Beck's not going to play until you get to summer camp. So he is not going to be on the field with this team. He's not going to be throwing to these receivers until well after spring camp. And now you're going to have to look forward and see just how close they are, just how set they are going into the 2025 season, because there's a lot of different questions. Oh, excuse me, Anthony, my fault. Markel Bell, excuse me. A lot of different talented offensive linemen for that group. So overall, going to be an incredible group up front for Miami. I think a much improved group from this year. But overall, you look forward to what Carson Beck looks like over the next couple of months. It's going to be a lot of different questions. You're going to have to pick up some wide receivers from the portal, I would assume, in that spring portal class. I think you're going to have to get a couple of guys to help him out around the way. But the reality is, he is not going to be fully ready for until summer camp, and you're going to have a lot of different things to figure out until then. You're going to have a lot of different things to put into place so that once he is on the field, once he finally gets a chance to throw these receivers, you can get him full running. You can get him on the ground, absolutely running downhill, and then you're in a position where 2025 can look even better than 2024. You can get to the CFP, you can win the ACC this time around, and put yourself in a great position. Obviously, a lot of money being thrown Carson Beck's way. Sounds like it's going to be about $4 million, making him the highest paid person in the NIL deal in college football history. Not necessarily all that surprising to me, if I'm being totally honest. This is the type of money that's going to be thrown around, and overall, we'll talk about it more and more, but I think Miami got a great one here. Now, there's questions about his health. There's questions about how long it will take him to get all the way back in. I think they're real questions. I think they're questions that could very well affect what Miami looks like in 2025. But you look forward to what they have in 2025. I think they got one of the best quarterbacks in the transfer portal last cycle. I think they might have gotten the best one this time around. A very, very talented player, a guy that they weren't talking about him being the number one overall pick for no reason. They weren't just making that up out of thin air. He's a very talented player, definitely a very good processor, and if you figure out that offensive line, it's going to be a very, very potent attack for Miami in 2025 with Carson Beck under center, as long as he is fully healthy, with a huge question here. But sticking with Miami, Miami does have a DC. It is Corey Heatherman. He has come in from Minnesota. A really interesting pickup here. Not the one that I expected. I expected a couple maybe bigger names, a couple of guys that maybe a little bit closer to their footprint, but the reality is, has done a great job with the Minnesota team. 10th in the country in points per game allowed, 6th in yards per game allowed, 4th in yards per play. Very, very talented coach. Definitely, obviously, will get an elevation in talent when he goes down to Miami, so that should help. The other part of this is Miami's going to run a really fast offense. Minnesota does not run a very fast offense. So a couple of those numbers, the 10th in points per game, the 6th in yards per game, the 14th in yards per play, some of that does have to do with just the pace of play up there in the Big Ten comparative to what you're going to face down there in Miami. So it's not the hire I expected. I think it is an awesome one. He's going to be up against it pretty early on. He's going to have to call a lot more plays than he had to call up there in Minnesota. He's going to have to deal with a lot more down there in Miami than he did up there in Minnesota, and it's going to be a huge question. There's no doubt about that. He's going to be one of those guys that you're going to be watching very closely. If they hit on this one, they're going to be in the CFP. If they don't, they're going to be right back in this position and asking if they have to get a new defensive coordinator going into 2026. So I think it's a great hire. I think it's going to be a guy that they're going to love down there, but definitely still some questions around this one, and we'll see how it translates to the Miami and that style of play especially. And we'll talk about Marcus Freeman here for a second, Anthony, because he is getting some interest from NFL teams, particularly the Bears. It sounds like the Bears want to interview him for their head coaching position. I'd be surprised if he ends up taking this. I'd be surprised if the Bears end up really offering this. Now, it does sound like they are serious. It does sound like they do want to sit down and talk with them. It does sound like they do want to see just where his head's at. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think he's going to leave. I think he's going to stay at Notre Dame now. Some of these offers are going to be really good. Let's just be totally honest. And if he does win a national title, maybe it will be the moment for him to ride off into the sunset. But the way that I see it right now, I think he's going to stick at Notre Dame. The Bears will try very, very hard to get him. Obviously, some other people, the Falcons, I would love to have him as our defensive coordinator. But overall, a lot of different guys that are going to be a lot of different positions that you're going to watch for this guy. He's done an incredible, incredible job with that team. And obviously, NFL coaches or NFL teams want a little bit of piece of that. So it's going to be interesting to watch what Marcus Freeman does this offseason. I expect him to be at Notre Dame going into 2025, but it is far from set. There are a lot of different teams that want to interview him for head coaching, for defensive coordinator positions, and the right position in the right place, it might just be too hard to pass up. But obviously plenty of time to talk about that. A lot of this will kick up after that Monday game, but definitely something to keep your eye out on. Deion Sanders is another one we're going to have to talk about with NFL jobs, and we'll have to do this a lot, I'll be totally honest with you, and some of it won't be reality. Some of it won't be something that we'll have to worry about, but Deion Sanders has shown interest, quote-unquote, in the Raiders job. It sounds like he is a little bit more interested than some people are expecting. The Las Vegas Review-Journal has said this, but I don't know. I don't see this one happening. I'll be totally honest. There was a video of him doing his first meeting at Colorado for the spring camp this past weekend. I don't expect him to leave Colorado, at least going into 2025. Now, 2026, 27, and so forth, that is a big-time question. There's no doubt about that. But I don't necessarily think this is going to happen. Definitely something that could happen, and if the Raiders do hire him, it's going to be a huge talking point. And Colorado is going to have 1,000,001 questions to answer. But at the end of the day, I do expect him to be the guy going into 2025. I do expect him to be leading Colorado in 2025. But again, that question is still very much up in the air. So Marcus Freeman as well as Deion Sanders are two guys you're going to want to watch pretty closely. I wouldn't expect it to happen, but definitely something that we'll see what happens in the next couple of days. Nick Saban is into the College Football Hall of Fame. This is about as easy of a decision that they have ever had to make around there. And definitely a guy that is college football in a lot of ways and has been for the last 15 years. In fact, we'll probably talk about it a little bit later in the week that the SEC didn't fall. Nick Saban just left. That's the reality of that situation. But overall, there's a lot of different things from this career that you can obviously take in. He's done an incredible, incredible job with that program, has built them up into kind of what they are today. Now, Alabama was not bottom feeders before, but there was a moment there before Nick Saban showed up where you were wondering, is Alabama going to be anything close to what they were with Bear Bryant and with a couple of the Gene Stallings and a couple of those other coaches? And then Nick Saban takes over, goes on 7 national championships, just absolutely tears people to pieces. And exactly 1 year after he announces his retirement, he gets the news that he is going to be a Hall of Famer. He's a guy that, frankly, could have been inducted 10 years ago, and I wouldn't have had much of an issue with it. I don't think a lot of people would. So, remarkable coach, definitely a guy that's going to be around college football for a very, very long time, and I don't think he's going to be college football commissioner as much as some people would like him to be, but at the end of the day, going to be a guy that will live on forever. There's no doubt about that, and especially in the College Football Hall of Fame, but even if he wasn't there, he would live on forever. He absolutely deserves to be there, probably should be the biggest figure there, frankly. Anthony Knapp is someone you're going to want to talk about as we get into this national championship. He will not be playing in the national championship, and this is the guy that had taken over at that left tackle position, started all 15 games for them. A freshman out of Roswell, Georgia, was a 3-star coming in. Charles Jagusa goes down in August, and they have to kind of figure it out. Now, this kid's become an absolute star. He didn't allow a sack in the final 9 games of the season. He's an absolutely incredible player. He is someone that he was a freshman All-American this year. I fully expect him to be a All-American the next couple of years. He's downright incredible and absolutely will be a first-round pick whenever that time does come, but he will not be playing in the national championship. It will likely be Tosh Baker kind of leaning in with him now. Charles Jagusa did come in for Rocco Spindler in that game. Rocco Spindler will be back for the national championship. So maybe it is Charles Jagusa just sliding back into that left tackle position, but it was Tosh Baker for that Penn State game. He allowed 5 hurries and 1 sack on 61 snaps in that game, so did a relatively good job, but not quite the Anthony Knapp level. And you're going to have to deal with Jack Sawyer. You're going to have to deal with JTT. So a lot of different questions here. Now, they do have depth. They have about as good of depth as you can find around the country when it comes to offensive line. But this is a huge hit to their pass pro. Is a huge hit to Notre Dame in this game. And whether it's Jagusa or whether it's Tosh Baker, they're going to have their hands full with those guys coming up for Ohio State. And this could be the difference. This could very well be the difference in this game on Monday. And then we got some draft declarations from these semifinal teams. Abdul Carter, not a question, obviously was going to jump in, but remarkable player. He could very well go number 1 overall, depending on how teams look at this thing. He is one of the most remarkable players that I've seen in college football in quite some time. The edge rushing is downright incredible, and he's a guy that can make all the plays in the world you possibly need him to make. So I cannot wait to see what this kid does at the next level. Frankly, I think there's a gold jacket in that kid's future. Then you do have Jalen Reed, a remarkable player on the back end for the Nittany Lions. Definitely a guy that kind of sparked their season in a lot of different ways. You know, that Wisconsin pick was a moment that I think a lot of people look at as the turning point for this Penn State team. He was very, very solid in coverage and definitely is going to be a guy that's going to make a huge amount of plays for them. Now, he moves on to the next level and could very well be a steal. Going to be a very interesting guy to watch and definitely someone that I very much am looking forward to seeing. And let's get to Anthony's questions here. And yeah, it will be interesting to kind of see where Carson Beck finds himself. You know, if it's the end of May, I think they're in a little bit better of shape. If it's closer to the beginning of July, then you might have a little bit of an issue. So it really does come down to just how quickly that heals, how quickly he can get back throwing in. I think it's all up in the air right now. So we'll obviously follow that very closely. Definitely something that's going to be really interesting to watch. And then talking about Heatherman here, a very, very talented guy. And obviously, that history with Shiano is going to be something that a lot of people are going to talk about and definitely something that is going to help him in this moment where you're calling plays for a big-time university. Having that background, having that guy to fall back on is downright incredible. But overall, the Kelvin Bank question is an interesting one because he has declared for the draft. Like Carter, he will be a top 10 pick. There's a lot of questions about where he does set up. Now, I do think he can play offensive tackle. Some people have thought about moving him into guard to play for the first couple of years, but overall, I think he's probably a left tackle, depending on the team he gets drafted to in a lot of different ways. Will depend on where he does play, but he can probably play anywhere, if I'm being totally honest, other than center is probably not where you want to put him, but he's very comfortable at left tackle. I think he can play right tackle, but probably is a little bit better on the left, and then you might just move him inside to make sure he plays the first couple of years, but a lot of different things that you can do with Kelvin Banks. Such a dynamic player, and definitely a guy that I fully expect to be, if not the first offensive tackle, definitely the second offensive tackle off the board in the class in April. And then Jaden Blue is the other guy, a really, really talented player, the best player on offense really throughout the CFP for Texas. Definitely was a very, very talented guy. Kind of a crowded running back room going into next year, so not overly surprising if I'm being totally honest. Yeah, I do think, you know, if he gets drafted by a Dolphins-type team, I do think he would be a right tackle. I think he would fit more into that position. It really just comes down to who do you have on the roster, how do you feel confident. If he gets drafted by the Bears, which I've seen in a couple of different ones, he's going to be that left tackle. I can almost promise you that, but a couple of different places definitely would kick him over to the right. A couple of different places would probably kick him into guard. So there's a lot of different questions here, but for Jaden Blue, I think this could be a difference maker at the next level. He's such a good receiving back. I think he's a guy that definitely could jump off the page. Probably won't be drafted until that 4th, 5th, 6th round, but definitely is a guy you're going to want to watch very closely. I think could develop into a huge player for one of these NFL teams in the next couple of years. But remarkable stuff happening all around the country. I mean, there's a million different questions about where guys are going in the portal, you know, what's happening in the national title game, where does Texas and Penn State go from here, a million different things to talk about. We'll get into just about everything around the national title. Tomorrow we'll get into storylines, we'll get into position battles, a million different things, and we'll talk about it all tomorrow. But thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports, we have you totally covered over here at GSMC. But thank you once again for listening. We'll be back to talk about everything around the national title in a week from today. But thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.